Tu B'Shvat Sameach. Welcome, Rabbi Ron Yitzchak Eisenman, back to the yeshiva, back to this mountain that you actually spent some time on. Was the yeshiva on this mountain? Was it the new building already when you were here?
Yes, it was the new building. When I came, it was, I think it just had opened. Yep.
Is this your first time back since the...
No, it's not my first time back. I've been back a number of times. I've been back because I have my mechutanim live here in Alon Shvut. So for some simchas, I've been back here.
Okay, well, we're happy to have you back for simchas. Happy to have you back to share some Torah. It's Parashat Yitro coming up.
Yeah, good to be back. Thank you.
There's a mountain out there called Har Sinai, but we don't really care. The Kedusha came and went. There's no Kedusha Kayemis. This is a mountain in which we learned a lot of Torah from our esteemed Rosh Yeshiva. On Parashat Yitro, what's the Kabbalah Torah that you had from Moreno Rabbeinu Rav Aharon Lichtenstein? How would you articulate what you received from him?
Well, I would imagine if I had to encapsulate it, let's say in 2 words, I would think it would be Torah's chesed. Probably in everything I saw him, and everything I saw him do, the aspect of chesed and caring and compassion for the zulat, for the other person, was very, very strongly seen and taught, and it was also obviously my example, very much so. In fact, I still recall he received a phone call from a woman here in Alon Shvut who was pregnant, and she mentioned that on the bus back from Alon Shvut to Yerushalayim, there were a number of yeshiva boys on the bus, and nobody stood up for her. No one gave her a seat. And she called Rav Lichtenstein. And looking back now, over 40 years later, but honestly, looking back now with over a quarter of a century in the rabbinate, where unfortunately too often our knee-jerk reactions is to defend and explain away, and his was just the opposite. He gathered the entire yeshiva in the Beis Medrash. He spoke openly about it and how impacted he was, how disappointed he was. And then I still remember he told the story, which one would imagine a story which is just sort of like self-aggrandizement of his own, but it was so, the way he told it, it was so in his typical modesty, that he was in Miluim, and he was driving, and he had a 4-hour bus ride in Miluim, I don't know, I guess to the north or to the south, I don't recall. And he said he had a seat there, and he was learning. And after 2 hours, he said to the woman who was standing next to him, and from the way he said it was a secular woman, he said to her, "Here, you sit now." And she looked at him somewhat incredulously, "Why?" And he said, "Well, we both paid the same fare, and I sat for half, and it's only fair you should sit for half." And the way he told it, there was not even this semblance of any sort of hubris.
Expected, right?
So I would say the Kabbalah Torah is Torah's chesed that I received here.
I actually remember that story. It's one of the fabled stories. I don't think I heard it directly, but I heard it passed on. And while you were speaking about his chesed, and I was thinking about Parashat Yitro in the introduction, which seems very anticlimactic. You'd expect there to be a lead-in from Kriyas Yamsov, from the Man, from Shabbos, Noche Hashem Elokecha. And Yisroel's arrival, I'm sure, carries many messages, but one of them is you just see Moshe through Yisroel's eyes, and you see the patience and the dedication, Me'boker Ad Ha'arev, Es Derech Yelchuba, Es Hamasa Shari Asun. And that's who we want to see walking up to Har Sinai. That's who we want to see Moshe Nigash Shel Harafel. A person who's patient, a person who is poised, and a person who is so tirelessly dedicated to other people, even in a way that's self-annihilating, that his father was really worried. You're just going to fall apart. You'll burn out. So it's what we saw. We really saw really great role models, and I'm sure you've continued to be that role model. How do you try to play that role as a rabbi, again, without being artificial, without presenting? How are you conscious of that with your mispalim? Not just to give a good cheer, not just to, but to be a role model for chesed and staka and midos.
Well, obviously, I'll let others decide if I'm a role model or not. I think that would be a little bit inappropriate for me to give myself the epithet of a role model or not. But I give a shir after Shabbos davening. Actually, after the Kiddush, mid-Kiddush, in Hilchos Ben Adam L'Chavero.
Maybe I just want to interrupt because a lot of our viewers aren't familiar with your background. You're a Rav in Passaic, New Jersey. A lot of them aren't from America. So
Right.
What's the name of the shul, just so people should know?
Right, so I'm a Rav in Passaic, New Jersey, which is a town in basically northern New Jersey. It has approximately, I would say, 1,800 Orthodox families.
Whoa. The city or the shul?
No, the city. It's a dual city, Passaic, Clifton, continuous towns and contiguous. The shul itself has about 300 family members, and it's it also has a whatever the reason, it became the focal point of minyanim. We have 40 minyanim a day.
During the weekday?
During the week, we have, starting at the earliest time for Talis and Tefillin, whatever that happens to be, going till 12 midnight, like every
What's the name of the shul?
Yeah, Ahavas Israel.
Based the field, you should rename it.
Right. So we call Ahavas Israel, we're hopefully right. So that's where I've been the Rav for 25 years. And on Shabbos, we have 4 minyanim. We have a 7-10 minyan, Hashkam minyan, then there's a main minyan at 8:30, then there's a Sephardic minyan for Edot HaMizrach, and then there's a 9:15 minyan for those who learn very late Friday night. And they want to, right. So anyway, I give a shir in Ben Adam L'Chavero. The halachas, and there's one thing which I've learned, which I constantly stress, is that in Ben Adam L'Chavero, you can attempt to be a role model, but remember, you'll never bat 1,000. It's interesting. You mentioned Moshe Rabbeinu. It's somewhat perplexing, perhaps. It's somewhat, I hope, not heretical, but on the verse Vayichad Yisroel, and Yisroel was overjoyed. So we're familiar, of course, with with Rashi, who quotes, I think, the Gemara in Sanhedrin of Tzadi Daled, that the Gemara says, according to one opinion, that his flesh became chidudim, I guess, became, I don't know, prickly or somehow, meaning he had
goosebumps.
Yeah, goosebumps, exactly. And then the Gemara says, Hainu da'amri inchi. This is what people say. Giora afilu ada sara dori lo tivaza armoa b'fnei. A convert, even after 10 generations, you should not in any way disparage a Gentile in front of him. But I was thinking, since you mentioned that, the person that we're learning it out from is Moshe. Meaning, Moshe is the one who's causing his own father-in-law to feel this pain, this emotional pain. I mean, this is what people say, Yisroel's reaction based on what Moshe's information. So perhaps one learns from there the same thing, meaning, nobody can, Ben Adam L'Chavero, you can do the best you can. You can do the best you can. And that's why in that way I was always very appreciative here in the yeshiva. Obviously, Rav Aharon Lichtenstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, he did become the man, the legacy, obviously in his own right and well earned. But on the other hand, I don't think, and I think he was very careful that he never was transformed into some sort of mythological individual who wanted, desired, or even as students, that he would be viewed as some sort of infallible, or as he would put it, petrified, statue of piety, of that, that wasn't him.
Right. Sadly, we live in an era in which charisma sometimes replaces content, and we're seeing in leaders, and we're seeing the ugly side of that and the dark side of that, and a lot of people feel that's why Moshe was a stutterer, because when you stutter, it's not your persona, it's not your enchantment, it's just your content, it's just what you have. And Rav Lichtenstein was enchanting, but not in the charismatic way. He didn't project his personality. He was very withdrawn. He was very uncomfortable initially in social settings, but you felt as if you're cutting through any charisma, any self-projection, but really to someone whose core was probably one of the most impressive people I'm still the most impressive person I've ever met in my lifetime. But.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that even my first meeting with him, I detected immediately a sense of shyness. It was a sense of shyness that he definitely portrayed, but as with everything in his life, he pushed himself very much to be that person, and correct. He in that way, the essence was truth. The essence was truth, and you couldn't. Look, I have to admit, and I realize on one hand, I don't want to be, whose Rebbe is better, who's like, can you top this? I don't want to. But I can honestly say, with sincerity and without hesitation, that he was, without a doubt, the most sincere, devoted person of integrity that I've ever met in my life. He was, in that way, he was unique. I remember, I've heard it more in perhaps, I hate to give labels, and we all do, but in the quote unquote, they say in the Haredi world, which again, we're all in the same world, but that if Darwin would have met the Chafetz Chaim, he never would have come up with his theory of evolution. Which obviously, I think in a simple way, is meant to say that no way one could imagine that the Chafetz Chaim evolved from an ape. But I'm saying to you, I guess, privately, in front of 600 people, but I'm saying to you privately that I think the same can be said about Rav Aharon Lichtenstein, because just the idea of the survival of the fittest and man's need to survive, and that which we all have, this need to be somewhat narcissistic and somewhat selfish and somewhat, im ein ani li mili, was something that he somehow transcended. Obviously he lived im ein ani li mili, but he transcended in so many other ways. I'm sure you saw it, I saw it, his interaction with his own children.
Sure.
The fact on Shavuos night he would divide the night equally to learn with Esti, not just with Moshe, Meir, and Yitzi. He would also learn Shavuos night with Esti. I'm sure that, like to learn with the Sugya on Shavuos with my, it was known in the yeshiva. I was at his house. I ate Hoshana Rabbis, who did at his house. He helped serve the food. I remember Tova said,
just like Moshe.
Yeah, she said, Aaron, could you get the fish? It wasn't, and obviously time was everything to him.
Yeah.
But he, again, that natural inclination to survival of the fittest, to him was I guess to be the Oved Hashem.
You juxtapose Rav Lichtenstein and the Chafetz Chaim. So there's an old saying about the Chafetz Chaim that it's a pity he was such a tzaddik. Because when you say the Chafetz Chaim, your image is of a tzaddik. The picture is the image, because it eclipsed how big of a Talmid Chacham he was. Especially you read the Bir Halacha, you read the Mishnah Berurah, it's little tidbits and summaries. You read the Bir Halacha, you look at one of the biggest Talmid Chachamim of the generation. I sometimes feel that Rav Lichtenstein is the inverse. It's a pity he was such a Talmid Chacham, because that's what people assume when you hear him. Mm-hmm. But the people that knew him internally, it was his tzidkas and his chesed and his midas and everything you're describing, more than whatever share we went to. And so,
It's interesting because perhaps his ultimate role model, his pedagogical role model, Reb Chaim Brisker, so as often has been said, as great as he was in learning, he was even greater in tzidkus. I believe Reb Meir Bar Ilan, in his classic book, Mevalozhin L'Yerushalayim, it was actually initially written in Yiddish, Mevalozhin B'Yerushalayim, so he writes there the fire in Brisk, and they couldn't find Reb Chaim, and then they see him running up in Volozhin. There's an upper Volozhin and a lower Volozhin. He was running up the hill with 3 children, 1 on his shoulders, 2 in each hand, and that was Reb Chaim Brisker.
You mentioned something before I wanted to follow through. When Yisroel counsels Moshe about selecting people who are appropriate to delegate authority to, judiciary authority, Anshe Emes Soni, Vatsa Anshe Chai Rei Elokim. So I'm intrigued by the Anshe Emes part. Obviously, tell me what you feel about intellectual honesty, because you mentioned the word integrity before. And obviously we're all finding that place between the way of life we want to lead, our approach to life. I was just talking to a boy in the Best Matters before, and he said, well, who's coming today? And last time I saw you was in Yeshiva University 35 years ago. You're an older bacher in the kollel. I was in college. But some of the things I've read that you've written, certainly recently, unfortunately, in response to some of the terrible crimes that our community is facing, but in general, I said, I feel, I don't know, but I feel when I read things you've written, not too many, but things I've read, that someone exhibits a lot of intellectual honesty. And you don't let that get in the way of your opinion. You don't shoot the arrows and draw the target. And this integrity, how do you struggle with that? How do you maintain that? Why is it important in our lives?
If there's one thing, which again, not just obviously here at Yeshiva HaRatzon, but we both recall Rav Aharon Lichtenstein quoting Paradise Lost from Milton in the Beis Medrash. And we probably both recall Israelis rolling their eyes that, who is this man quoting some non-Jewish source, and that's putting it mildly.
But little did they know he was actually quoting. They would have had a real heart attack.
Right. And I think once again, we talked about honesty and intellectual honesty. Let's give the case you talked about, the case that everyone's talking about, let's just say the Waldler case. I don't understand, I was thinking about it in the cab ride up here, I don't understand, why are we scared of the truth? Like, are we so insecure in our religious community that we can't admit or we can't deal with that there can be people who wear yarmulkes, whatever the type of yarmulkes, wear odd type of head coverings, where whatever their orthodox persuasion is, are we so insecure that we can never admit that there's room for improvement? Yes, there are. We both know there are, especially you teach here with the boys, I'm sure you see it, there are cynics. There are cynics and they're naysayers, and there are those who are always ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater, of course. But that can't preclude us from dealing with issues and attempting to improve and attempting to root out what should be rooted out. And we can't circle the wagons. I mean, since we're opening, I have to admit, because it's such a sore point by me, but the fact that one of, if not the most major Orthodox publications in this country used the epithet Zatzal on such a pernicious individual, my only reaction was, even if it would have been in a moment of intoxication, that after I would leave this world, my children would ever even have the thought of using that epithet. I would demand that they would never, in order never to be in any way associated. But are we so insecure that somebody whose evil, whose cruelty, Are we denying free choice in this world? Are we denying schar v'onesh? And that we have to whitewash everything? So I have to admit, almost the question becomes the other way. How can you be dishonest? I don't really understand.
Also, as I'm sure you articulated so loudly and eloquently, honesty is important because it shows confidence and it allows improvement, as you say. But it's also, we want to be like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we're like the Rebbeinu Shalom, it's chesed emes. And the more that we lace our world with deceit and dishonesty and confused narratives, the further we are from the Rebbeinu Shalom. This is a lama de shikra. We can't reach complete emes. We try our hardest, and we're not always able to, but at least we want to strive for it. Call the Gadol V'lo Yasab. There's a lot to talk about. We have to have a mincha now. It's Tu B'Shvat, so no Tachlin. We have an extra minute, so we get a minute today. Kol Gadol V'lo Yasab, the second shot of Hashem. Your voice should continue to teach our Torah and teach our HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah to all of Am Yisrael. I look forward to joining one of the 40 minyanim one day if I'm in Passaic.
Amen, and I look more forward to joining the minyan here at Yeshivat HaRatzon today.
See you the next time you come back. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Taragin.